Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to The Cutting Room, the show where we talk to the masters of content marketing and learn about their process, philosophy, and pregame before they go in to edit an article live. I'm your host, Tommy Walker, and I'm very excited to have you on the show today, introduce you to my guest, Rand Fishkin. Before we get into it, please feel free, everybody. This is a live streaming format. Let's make the most of the format. Introduce yourselves into the chat. And tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and maybe drop a link to your website, a little bit of self-promo. So my guest today is Rand Fishkin. He needs no introduction to the online marketing community. He is the founder of Moz, the co-founder of SparkToro, and the author of the wonderful book, Lost and Founder. Rand, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tommy. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on. So we're going to just jump straight into it. I don't like to do a whole lot of preamble. I would love to know, Moz came from super humble beginnings in the very beginning there back in 2004. I would love to know, how has that played into your philosophy on content marketing and the effect that it can have on a business and a life, essentially?
Let's see. I think... I'm not sure I always do this perfectly, but I try to, even as you know, my career and profile has gotten a little bigger than it was back in the Moz days. Stay humble about what I create, and not assume that my historic knowledge or experience makes me smarter or better or more worth listening to than anyone else. And when I create, whether that's written content or presentation or a video, a podcast interview, whatever it is, try to operate from a place of not assuming that anyone should know anything about me or should take my words as gospel, and retain that, hey, you still have to prove yourself, right, to any given audience. And I think that there are unfortunately many creators and sort of influential people in the digital marketing world who do not take that approach. And when I encounter their content in that style, it doesn't resonate with me. So maybe I'm a reaction to that.
Okay, I like that. So remaining humble is a excellent place to start with as it relates to the philosophy. What role do you think that content can play in that growth of the business, and more specifically, putting out your point of view or creating a point of view for the world to see?
I mean, I think a big part of this is differentiation, right? It is... Tommy, I think that you and I have both been around. We were talking in the pre-interview that you were paying attention to Moz way back in 2006, which was only a few years after I started it, and it is, definitely the case that whereas in 2006 or 2008, even into 2010, you probably could create content and that alone differentiated you from most of your competition. That is no longer the case today. Creation is not even the minimum bar. It's just table stakes. The challenge of the current digital marketing environment is that you are constantly competing. Even if you have no direct competitors for your product or service, you are competing for attention with tens of thousands of other publishers and creators. And quality is unlikely to be what differentiates you. Quantity is unlikely to be what differentiates you. Price is unlikely to be what differentiates you. And so you have to look for other tactics, positioning, uniqueness of character, uniqueness of the approach, of the content's format, of the message that you're sending. Having a unique opinion, creating conflict, being willing to make enemies, those are things that can help separate you, but the other ones are not.
Lead into that a little bit more. Talk about coming up with that unique voice. And I think when we were talking about the piece that we're going to be looking at a little bit later today, I would love to know, what are you doing, or what have you done to sort of break through that noise and stop playing things by the numbers?
Yeah, I think one is be aggressively idiosyncratic, right? And take a position on an issue that is uncommon, and then attempt to argue that, position as best I can. I think there's also a sense of not being beholden to formula. So I have tricks and ways that I do content creation, and Amanda, who I think might be in the audience right now, she and I do a lot of the content stuff for SparkToro, and we are constantly giving each other feedback around the uniqueness of things versus falling into the trap of producing the same content that is already out there. I think what's hard about it is the digital marketing universe trains us to look for patterns. It trains us to look for elements that predict success, correlation studies or analyses of whatever in SEO world, right? It's like title tags should be this long and content should be this many words and you should use this many images, and those sorts of formula are very limiting, and I think they make people think in terms of a set of, a sort of checklist of structures. And the frustrating part about that is there are elements of that work, that are true, that you should do. And when it comes to what you should create and why you create it and who's going to resonate with it, those formula tend to work pretty badly. A lot of that copycat methodology, or, I saw this technique on whatever, Moz's website or Search Engine Watch or Brian Dean's website or whatever. And like, we use that formula and it works super great. That was definitely true in, that sort of growing up decade of SEO and content. And it is not very true today.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show too, is you've got this really unique background right now where you've got the SEO background, which is where that by the numbers sort of world came into play.
Yeah.
Right? What is the definition? Let's talk about it. Like, get 5,000 words in before you even get to the actual meat of the article. And now you've sort of pivoted into this world where it's more audience-based, audience intelligence. That's what SparkToro is all about. Tell me where you're like walking that line, right? Where are you marrying the two there?
So we definitely lean much more in the, I care about my audience. I care about what's going to resonate with them. I care about what they're going to share, what's going to help them feel an emotion, what's going to help them think differently, do their work differently. I don't subscribe to a lot of the, previous things around SEO. One of the weird things that is true of SparkToro is we get almost no search traffic because we don't create we don't create virtually any keyword-rich, keyword-targeted content, and thus we don't rank for nearly anything. Almost all of our search traffic is for branded terms, SparkToro tool, Rand Fishkin, that kind of thing. I think there are ways to marry up these two things, right? I think that you can be very thoughtful about your audience and you can build structures that make content resonate with them. And you can also do keyword research and marry that together, and you can have your content be a certain amount of length, and you can use H1s and H2s, and you can, make sure that you have a certain number of images, and that you discuss the relevant topics that Google is going to consider in the content analysis. Those are all fine things. It's just not where I play anymore.
Right. Yeah, and you've taken this position, which I really enjoy. You wrote an article about this a little while ago. It's who will amplify this and why. And I would love to learn a little bit more about the thought process behind that and where you're using that research to create that content for those specific people.
Okay. So thought process behind it is basically that in order to stand out on the modern web, I find that the key is you need to be amplified by other people, right? Essentially, if you are shouting your own content, unless you have a absolutely massive following, huge email list, tons and tons of followers, and you don't really need to grow the audience that you're reaching. You need other people who have platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, their blogs, their email newsletters, their podcasts, their video interviews. If you basically need them to succeed. And so this idea of having a reason why other people and other publications will amplify your work is, I think, crucial. It's at the core of modern content marketing, modern content amplification, right? I don't know if you've had him on, but Ross Simmons talks about this all the time. He's kind of the 1% creation, 99% distribution. And in my view, there's some truth to that, but I think that a huge part of distribution is the creation. You cannot just create the formulaic crap and then expect to work really hard to distribute it. That's just asking for pain, right? This is sort of like the classic marketer's dilemma of, what do you call it? Smearing lipstick on the pig, where you're taking a product that fundamentally doesn't resonate with the market and trying to force it down the throats of people who don't care. I think that is a terrible way to go versus having the product itself, in this case, your content, be something that is very attractive and appealing and emotionally resonant and ticks kind of all the boxes of what earns modern engagement. And that is not universal. It is different for every different audience. And this is why the audience research piece is so important. So when you talk about who will amplify this and why, it's important to earn amplification because otherwise your distribution is not going to get there. And it's important to design with amplification in mind, which is where the whole concept of the blog post comes from. And the who and what they care about is different in every different sector and for every different group. So there's not a whole lot of formula here, right? The formula is at the very strategic level, not at the tactical one.
We're talking about who they are, what they care about. Why are people sharing content, right? You wrote about this in the, who will amplify this and why. What are your thoughts on why people share content?
I think they, I think they share it for a variety of reasons, but one of the biggest ones, for better or worse, is I already have a particular opinion on a topic, and you have produced something that reinforces my opinion or belief about that topic, right? So I think Tom Hanks gets together with Hillary Clinton and they eat babies together, and here's this piece from Zero Hedge on how Tom Hanks and Hillary Clinton, whatever. And so I will share that piece because it reinforces an existing belief of mine. And you can see right there, The Atlantic did published some great work from researchers on Facebook who looked at kind of the top 500 pages that produce the most engaging content, right? Where the overwhelming majority of Facebook's engagement comes from. And yeah, I mean, a ton of that stuff is basically the elite users of Facebook are playing exactly that game, right? They produce emotionally triggering, usually along vectors like anger and hatred and division, because these are powerful, human connectors. And I think many people look at that and they go, oh, well, that's politics, and I hate that stuff, and obviously I'm not going to do that for my brand. But you don't have to go into the political realm to look for this. You can find, for example, SparkToro takes the position of basically having a very strong set of enemies. We believe that the Facebook, Google duopoly, Amazon could be included in their triopoly around marketing, digital marketing. Those three companies have, 80%, 90% of all digital marketing spend going through those three companies. And very frankly, we think that's totally wrong.
Yep.
We think that triopoly is essentially using the fact that they have dominant monopolistic practices and market position to make it look like the advertising dollars you spend with them are the absolute best ones. And they specifically make it difficult to impossible to track non-advertising through them sources. Mm-hmm. And so you get this universe that looks like how digital marketing looks, where we basically all throw our money at these companies. I think that is really, really problematic. And when we have conversations like that, it resonates with a lot of digital marketers. They're like, yeah, I do kind of hate giving all my money to them. Yeah, I hate that they get credit for all these conversions, which I know would have happened anyway. Yeah, I hate that they limit my creativity, and I hate that my boss and team and client doesn't invest in content marketing or PR or other organic opportunities or more serendipitous kinds of marketing that's long-term, even though we know that would have a bigger impact because they can't perfectly track it back to their analytics. All of those frustrations that we know people in the field feel, not everyone, but many, create this sense of tension and these oppositional forces. And when we create content, it's not whatever Tom Hanks and Hillary Clinton eat babies. It is Facebook and Google are taking budget from your most effective marketing towards your most trackable marketing, and they're giving you more conversions you already would have gotten.
And that can change the culture within a business entirely, the way that entire teams function. It's
yes.
terrible.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying, right, Tommy, when you hear that argument, you go, yes, I get it. I'm angry about that. I have emotional resonance with it.
Yep.
That's why it's a powerful conversation to have. And you can do the same thing, right? If you are, whatever it is, I think for people in like crypto world, they create enemies out of the Federal Reserve Bank, or if you are in the world of a lot of health food, creates this like enemy out of the sugar and carbohydrate industrial complex, right, and processed food world. If you are in travel world, there's folks who kind of create based on their unique thing. They make enemies of kinds of travel that they disagree with, or staying home and doing nothing, or even I've seen some folks do this, right, where they're like, don't get a mortgage, right? You should be on the road. Like the digital nomad lifestyle is a thing. There's lots of creators in that sort of world. So it can pay to have enemies and to create conflict, to use that emotional resonance in lots of ways.
Well, I think something that's interesting too, I was just reading this piece. There was a study done a couple years back, and it was a satire site that said findings say that 60% of people don't read the post that they're commenting on, right? So this was a satire site. That was the headline. The article itself was a big block of lorem ipsum. And then
the comments.
Imagine, and the comments were bonkers. So there was another study that was actually like the actual version of that study, and it found that it was like, instead of 7 out of 10 people like the fake study said, it was actually like 6 out of 10 people, and it's like ridiculous, and it's because that headline itself is emotionally resonant, right?
So this is another thing where, we can get to the live edit at some point here, and this article we want to talk about, but I think that in many, many cases, the piece of content that you are writing is vastly less important than the topic, the title, the subheadline, and the sort of impact of the piece, the overall conclusion, the story that it's telling. The quality of that content maybe has some impact, but I think it's in the 20%. The length of the piece is in the 20%. The keywords in the URL, that's in the 20%. The number of words in the headline that you use and how you structure the headlines and the visuals, that's in the 20%. And 80% is just those three things.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. Like John Benini, he kind of talks about this every now and again too, where it's like keywords don't give you the angle, right? Like keywords give you what people are searching for. It doesn't give you the angle. So Patrick says here in the questions, so when you find a SERP that has a lot of sameness, how are you thinking about bringing uniqueness in delivery versus being too unique so the big G doesn't get it?
I try to be too unique so Google doesn't get it.
Okay.
And here's why. This sounds very weird coming from like, wait, aren't you the founder of Moz and don't you care about SEO? No, I don't. I fundamentally, my philosophy around content, at least for SparkToro, and I would encourage other people to think about this as well, is I don't worry about my rankings. I don't worry about targeting keywords. I worry about impacting my business. And I worry about doing that through channels that I can own and control, and often ones that are outside of search. I fundamentally believe that one of the best ways to build strength in your digital marketing universe and in the flywheel the engine that's powering your marketing is not to be reliant, certainly not exclusively and hopefully very lightly, on any single source. That includes Google. So yep. When I see a SERP that is very samey and yada, 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 I might take some insight from, people are searching for this. Maybe this topic is of interest. I'm going to write something about that potentially that does not try to rank, but that does try to resonate very strongly with the audience I care about earning and earn amplification from them in the places where I know they pay attention, which for us primarily is Twitter, LinkedIn, email lists, the universe of sort of podcasts and YouTube channels of digital marketing universe, and to a certain extent, some other social networks, occasionally Facebook and Instagram come into that. I can talk a little bit about TikTok because there is a digital marketing TikTok, but we have had bad experiences with it.
It's emerging for sure.
Yeah.
Ryan Law actually talked about this. He wrote an article about the second mover advantage of it was like a couple years back, and he was saying that looking at Google is now like looking into the night sky, where stars from 1,000, you're getting light from stars from 1,000 years ago, and what worked back then, like HubSpot took over all the key phrases for marketing related stuff. So like, and those positions don't change very much at all.
I mean, a ton of. I still get, for some reason, Moz has refused to take me off the list, so I get the Google Search Console report, and I'm like, yeah, man, they're getting millions of search visits a month, right? Like Moz's content is still 1, 2, 3 for like almost everything you search for around SEO. That's cool. That's great. Like I'm happy for them, but yeah, I don't think you could reasonably do what we did, even 10 times better with 10 times more effort and a team that's huge and the very best stuff, and outrank those players, right? Like they have a 2-decade long head start. They have all of the built-in advantages that confers. Google likes to rank content whose brands are well known and recognized and trusted and liked and paid attention to by people. In 10 years, I hope SparkToro will be in a position where our brand is so well known and well liked that there are 100 times more people searching every day for SparkToro than there are people searching for audience research.
Yep. Yeah, I was saying this recently too. It's like people make decisions, like people sleep on direct traffic because it's not measurable, exactly what you're talking about. But people make decisions in Slack channels and in email lists, which you can't measure. You can't see that. So this this emotionally resonant thing is like, I love it. I love that's where you're at now.
Yeah.
What does that process look like for you? What's that research process look like when you're finding out what's going to resonate, and how is that infusing itself into the actual like brain to fingertips?
Yeah. So things that we care a lot about, Amanda and I care a lot about, are what is our audience talking about? What problems are they encountering? What are they thinking when they encounter those problems? How do they basically it's sort of it's a little bit like customer journey, but it's not necessarily customer centric. It is more audience centric. So for example, someone is learning digital marketing, they're coming up in the world of our field, and they're being exposed to various channels. Putting out a counterfactual and unique piece that speaks to some of the topics that they might be learning about or that they already have preconceived notions about, but that are emotionally resonant and maybe make some enemies, that works really well, right? And you can see that with, who will amplify this and why is a great example of that. And you know what? If you go to the SparkToro blog and you just scroll through the last 20 posts, you can see exactly what we're talking about here in virtually every one of them.
I love it. Yeah, and there was, let's see, where are my notes here? Because you talk about, more recently, you're talking about episodic content too, and you've always been a big fan of having content that builds off of itself. How is that, like, once you find the audience and what's working with them, how are you then doubling down on that?
Yeah, I mean, the goal here is basically, if you think about the reasons why a television show, a Netflix show, for example, is successful, a lot of it is not the first day that episode 1 comes out, the fan base is huge and they all love it and think it's great. That's not it at all, right? What happens is Netflix will take a show. We could talk about Amazon or Hulu or HBO or anybody. They take a show, they will launch it, and they know that slowly over time, the idea is that the show's audience should show growth. So maybe, Tommy, you take a chance on, I don't know, some new TV show on Hulu, and you're like, hey, Rand's really into, I don't know, Italian cooking. I bet he'd like this show. Hey, Rand, have you seen this show that's on Hulu? Da, da, da. Oh, no, I haven't. I'll go check it out. And then Hulu's analytics are basically looking for, does the show organically over time build up more and more of an audience to the people who were watching, episode 1 through 5? Do most of them stick around for 6 through 10 and season 2 and season 3? And then as you get to season 3, hopefully you're getting lots of new fans who are going back to season 1 and watching all of those. And now Hulu has benefited not only from each new episode that they put out, but from the back catalog. The back catalog has built the brand, it's built loyalty, it's built affinity, it's built engagement, it's gotten them subscribers, it will continue getting them subscribers for hopefully years and decades to come. That's how episodic content works too, right? The idea is Amanda and I produce Office Hours, right? This bi-weekly webinar series. We actually use Crowdcast for it, the same system that we're using here, right? Which we love. And we're getting like 1,400 people on these webinars, up from, I don't know, maybe 200, 250, 300 the first few episodes. So it's just amazing, right? And what's extraordinary about it is we take all of those, we publish them to YouTube. We have them in our back catalog that you can find on SparkToro as well. And it does the same thing. Someone references an old episode of Office Hours, someone watches that, then they subscribe because they want to see the new ones, and it builds up just like a great show does.
It's squiggly. It's squiggly. And what a lot of people don't realize too is like this is something that sites like BuzzFeed have been doing for years too, with their audience intelligence, and they learn about it, and then they find the small segment of people, and then keep building it around and test it out, and then see what happens. I try to tell this to people sometimes where I'm like, Netflix, if you think about how much advertising Netflix does, like how much stuff have you discovered on Netflix through advertising versus
and it's
word of mouth? And
what's amazing is Netflix, a primary source of advertising is Netflix itself. Right? They know that we are all of us subscribers are logging into the app to consume some content, and that is where and when they advertise other content to us and suggest things and recommend things and nudge us towards stuff, right? And in email. I'm a subscriber to Netflix. Netflix will be like, hey, Rand, you remember how you binge watched that terrible Witcher show last year? Season 2 is out. I'm like, oh no, you're not getting me this time. That show is garbage. But they saw that I saw it, and they're upset that it's been out for months. Like, why aren't you watching this? And I'm like, hey man, same reason I'm not watching, Cobra Kai season 3. I think they did convince me to watch season 2, which was also terrible. And oh man, that poor guy cannot act, but it's still kind of fun,
I'll give you Cobra Kai, but we're gonna diverge on Witcher. Yeah, Patrick says you went too far on the Witcher one. No, it's true.
I mean,
it's true though. But
let's be real. That is not a quality television program, right? I'm not saying you can't enjoy it. People enjoy terrible things all the time.
Right.
I like a Snickers bar. That's not a quality food item, but let's just recognize junk for what junk is.
Right. Exactly. And divisiveness is, again, the name of the game, right? Something that's good is going to split the audience regardless.
Yeah.
All right. So,
and this is actually really important on this point around episodic content and content in general. You do not need to appeal to everyone. In fact, I think that a ton of content marketers are either nudged or biased by their employers, their agencies, their teams, their clients, that they can't do these even mildly controversial things, that they can't turn off some segment of their audience. And I think that is dumb as heck. I think it is a superpower to be able to turn off a large segment of your audience so that you can really focus and get in and ingratiate yourself with another group. That you take that power off the table, I think you really lose out.
Dive into that a little bit more, because Shlomo's asking, like, can you talk about conflict-driven content for large brands, large corporate brands? And I've got this experience myself here. They tend to shy away from controversy.
Yes.
Very, very true.
Yes, and I think that's a wonderful thing because it gives startups an opportunity to take share away from them. Yep. So I hope, this is not necessarily speaking to hey, you have a big corporate client and they're unwilling to take risks. I am not the person who's going to talk them into taking risks. What I'm going to tell them is, that's awesome. I hope you keep taking no risks so that your smaller competitors in the market can steal market share away from you bit by bit by, essentially Airbnb would do things that Hilton and Marriott would never be willing to do, right? Just like Google was willing to do things that Yahoo was never willing to do. It's weird to say, but it's absolutely true. I think Slack was willing to do things Microsoft was never willing to do. And, this is how you carve out a market sector for yourself, is you find your people, your audience, you focus on them. You don't worry about, 5 billion people. You worry about 1,000 people and then turning that into 2,000 and 10,000.
Right, and it's death by 1,000 cuts for the larger companies. I've worked with like both the large organizations, like the established old guard, and then within the startup space, and it's really interesting to see the difference between the company that's disrupting the market versus the one that's being disrupted. Right?
Yeah.
And like the fear that is in there. And I would say, Shlomo, that the biggest thing there is it's kind of a political question. It's more about the internal politics of a company, how you would deal with something like that.
And this goes a lot to, how basically how the executive team is rewarded and what they're rewarded for, right? So their incentives, their fears, their motivations are going to dictate a ton of this, right? I think that, when I, for example, was CEO of Moz, I was much more willing to be far riskier in all kinds of behavior and, growth tactics and marketing and all those kinds of things than subsequent leadership has been, because they're sort of trying to preserve this thing that got built. They're like, okay, well, how do we, we want to grow, growth is important, et cetera, but like, we can't lose anything.
Right. Yeah, I heard a phrase not too long ago, actually it was a long time ago, early in my career, where it was, you want to simultaneously attract the right people and repel the wrong ones.
I love that so much. I love getting rid of people that I don't want in my net, right? Like, if you are listening to this and you're like, is he making fun of QAnon? That's my whole life. Like, I don't want you in my world, right? I want you to go away and like be in your little Facebook hidey hole and not be part of my universe. And I think that's just as powerful as attracting the right people, because when you turn off the wrong ones, you don't have to serve that customer segment, and that lets you, from a product standpoint, a marketing standpoint, a strategy and execution standpoint, a hiring and firing standpoint, it lets you do all the right kinds of things to get alignment in an organization. And when you make those walls too large, I don't think you can build an exceptional organization around that.
Yeah, it's the content that's out in the world is reflective of what's going on internally. When I was at Shopify, someone was talking with Craig Miller on Twitter, talking about how he never really cared about brand, and that's not something that he ever invested in. But what he cared about was like investing in the company, the culture, and everything else. And I can tell you that on the content team, we never had anything like brand guidelines dictating what it was that we did. They trusted us to do what we did best, and that the culture itself would eke through in the content. And I think that there's a whole nother conversation to have around that.
I mean, I love having some brand like guidelines, not as to restrict you, but as to like show you this is who we are, and this is who we're not, and this is who we're after, and this is who we're not. I think those are helpful. But yeah, you can take off the rails and let the team do it themselves, and you'll get another interesting perspective, right?
Right. Well, and Moz became very defined by its community, right? Like, the voice of the company didn't just come from the company. It was from everybody. So it's an interesting take there. All right, so I'd love to get into having this whole like idea of positioning and uniqueness and all of that in mind. Let's jump into the edit. I would love to get your first impression of this. And folks, I'm going to share a copy of this in the chat so you can follow along as we're going in. What was your first impression of this piece? We've got the CoSchedule moat, leveraging competition-free content to build a $5 million ARR SaaS company.
Yep. So my sense is, my hope is they are very much trying to reach a super insidery crowd, because this is a lot of acronyms, it's a lot of insider language that you're probably going to turn off 95% of people who see it in their feed. So hopefully they're only really going after the 5% of people who are specifically looking to build small to mid-cap SaaS companies, software as a service businesses, which is a pretty narrow slice of the market, right? You're narrowing it by $5 million, right? So $5 million, impressive, absolutely, but that's going to turn off anyone who's already above those numbers, right? And you're almost certainly going to turn off anyone who is a solopreneur or sort of a tiny team who's struggling to get to 1,000 MRR, right? So you got to play in that narrow band. The other thing is um, the language is a little awkward here, right? So it's leveraging competition-free content to build. You could very reasonably say CoSchedule built a 5 million ARR SaaS company using this content technique. And then it's a little bit of a different positioning. It's easier to read and process. I'm not saying that's the greatest headline ever. I'm sure you come up with a better one, but you get the sense that this is wordy and nerdy.
You're optimizing for the social feed, driving a little bit of curiosity there. This is the framework that they use.
I mean, not to get SEO-y on this, right? But my old colleague and one of the people I think is smartest in the SEO world, Cyrus Shepard, has been, building a new software business of his own and did all this analysis around like Google rewriting 95% of title tags that are longer than 70 characters. And this is way longer than 70 characters. So I don't think they're targeting SEO here.
First thing you're doing when you look at a piece, what's the first thing you're looking at? We start with the headline, obviously, but then what comes next?
I am trying to think about who's the audience for this, who will amplify this, why will they amplify this, and then I'm also thinking in terms of the content design. My model, which Amanda and I love, is hook, line, and sinker, right? The hook is the title, the line is the setup, the sinker is that sort of, it can be in the conclusion, it doesn't have to be, it can also be in the meat of the piece if it's an explainer piece, but it kind of delivers on the promise that was created by the hook and line. So when I look through this one, let's see, I think that if you are a huge fan of CoSchedule, and or a huge fan of sort of this technique, maybe you're an agency or a consultant who helps people in the sort of this idea of competition-free content or content moats in general, that this piece might resonate with you enough to be amplification worthy, assuming that it delivers on its promise. And then I'm looking for that hook, line, and sinker, and it's a little tough. Maybe I'm too jaded of an entrepreneur, but those 4 bullet points, right? So 8 years after launching the company from the Peace Garden State, they're not. Those are all less impressive than the headline. Right? So okay. 5 million ARR, that's the most impressive one. These are all like, okay, well that doesn't actually sound all that super impressive. If they had, generating this many leads per day, had traffic numbers in there, if they had the growth rate. So to be on the Inc. 5000, it depends on the year, but like you can be growing as little as about 50% year over year. It can be even lower some years. So it's hard to say. Did they have 3 years where they grew at 500% and the rest of the years were flat? Or I don't know, right?
Right.
So I would just say I'm not sure. I think those bullet points they look to me like you're filling out a template. Put the impressive achievements in the top bullet points, not, hey, I found these really impressive achievements, I'm going to put them in there. I think as we go through this piece, you'll probably hear me say a lot. This feels like they took an outline and tried to fill in the blanks rather than kind of letting the story dictate the format or letting the value for the reader dictate the format.
That is a question I have never asked on this stream before, and one that I am very curious now. Are you a planner or a pantser?
You mean by the seat of my pants?
Yeah.
Yeah. Much more seat of the pants than planner, which is not to say we do no planning. We do some, we will, for example, SparkToro kind of has this 2022 overarching strategy of we've identified customers that really resonate with our product. They tend to be consultants and agencies. They tend to do some form of, content marketing or PR or brand strategy, brand marketing. And so a lot of our content efforts are designed to target those people, reach into communities where they already exist, blah, 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 blah. So I like having that overarching strategy, but then it's very serendipitous, right? So Amanda will say, hey, I had this idea, and I'll be like, yeah, let's write it up. Boom, push it out. I love it, right? I like leveraging seat of your pants, and I like having a big picture strategy. This is who we're going after. This is why. This is how.
I'm in the same boat as you. We had Aaron Orendorff on not too long ago, and he's very much on the outline research, like let's know what we're going after, technical SEO, keyword, like all that. And for me, I've always been the type of person that says, let my research sort of unfold as I'm going through the piece, because it becomes a lot more interesting for me to. It's a journey, right? That's really what it comes down to. Like,
I mean, I can feel, if you go to even a format like fiction, right? I think you can really feel, whatever television or film writing that is by the book, where, where like someone came in and said, okay, I want an action sequence. I want conflict. Then I want a romance that doesn't resolve. Then I want one that does. Then another action sequence. And then we close with, whatever. Yeah, Michael Bay movies. Do they make money? Sure. Right? Like some of them absolutely do. Are they piles of dung most of the time? Yes. So I'm not saying this is a pile of dung. I don't mean to suggest to the writers of this. Like I said when we were chatting in the pre-interview, I think it's possible that this could be a very successful piece. It could do exactly what they needed to do with exactly the audience that they were doing with. It's not the way that I would design, create, or promote or position a piece. That's neither here nor there, right? If you're looking for, well, how would Rand do it? I can tell you those things. If you're looking for, well, are you sure it wouldn't be successful? That I can't tell you. It could very well be.
Okay, so Patrick is asking here, do you think that being a pantser makes the emotion of the writing come through a bit more? Like, as you discover more, you get excited, you want to share it, so that changes how you convey the information.
Yeah, I think it's ludicrously difficult to write to an outline, not to an outline, but take a story that you are not personally excited about, that doesn't personally emotionally resonate with you, and somehow infuse that with emotion. I mean, if you read any journalist out there, you can instantly tell the difference between a piece where they have their heart and soul in it versus one where they're covering the story. I like pieces where you put your heart and soul into it. I think that's what resonates with people. I think that's what changes behavior. I think that's what sticks in our memories and minds. I think I'd rather have one of those pieces than 10 of the cover, the story pieces, because I am looking for building brand affinity and emotional resonance and brand memory. I am not looking for raw traffic numbers.
Right. And it's because people will talk about now, like, oh, we want to write thought leadership pieces, right? I think that's a ridiculous thought. Thought leadership is a result. It's not a format, first and foremost. But it's also something where if you're not discovering it as you're going along, like if you're not having that emotional, like the emotional quality of it, like that needs to be there, and you can't plan that. You can't plan beat for beat what that's going to look like.
I mean, I don't know all of the formats that you might do personally, Tommy, but I am sure you can tell the difference too when you ask a question to a guest, right, on this show, and the question is tactical and perhaps informative, and they give their 2 cents on how they do something. And you'd never take that moment and clip it into, 90 seconds and put it on, Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and use it to promote the episode, because that, that glint in their eye of anger or frustration or excitement or interest is not there. And I think if you can create content that gets people to those places and that's just blindingly obvious on someone's face as they're writing it, as they're reading it, as they're talking about it, just so much better, so much better. And you can do it with dry topics. You just have to take the right angle and the right positioning.
How do you go about that?
I think you find the emotion inside yourself when you're doing things around that work, and then you look for the story there. So if oh man, I need to write about the interest rate hike by the Federal Reserve Bank. Oh my God, that sounds so boring. What if instead I wrote about, my friend Dan, who has been desperately trying to buy a house for the last 5 years and is encountering the same pain that millions upon millions of people between the ages of 25 and 50 are encountering in the United States right now, which is this supply demand problem and where to live issues and just heartbreaking painful points around their finances and what generations before them think they should be able to do versus what they can actually do. And then I weave in the story of what this Federal Reserve Bank rate hike actually means to people like that. Okay, now you've taken something boring and you have made it human and real, and you have tied it to, someone, a house hunter in our community, and maybe you surveyed lots of them, and maybe you had conversations with those people, and now you have a dozen stories that are illustrating someone's life in such a real way that it is both interesting to follow and it sounds like me. That yep. You have to create that I can identify with the human being in this story, right? So in the case of our CoSchedule moat, can I identify with CoSchedule? Does this sound like my kind of company? Oh man, 5 years ago, CoSchedule was struggling. They could barely grow. The founders were thinking of quitting the business they were at. I'm not saying this is true, but right, their first 3 years had been, super questionable. Around the Thanksgiving dinner table, their parents were telling them to throw in the towel and get real jobs. And then what? And then what happened that got them to this $5 million mark? Because that I care about. I immediately care about that. Because I was at that Thanksgiving dinner table when my parents and grandparents were like, give the fuck up. Stop this madness. Like, if you can find those points and weave that into your story, I think you're just going to do so much better than hitting your outline. That's me.
Yeah. No, and that's something that, that's why I like to pants it, right? I'm going to keep just saying that. I like to pants it because there's always... a study says blah, 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 right? Everybody does this. We have study says blah, blah, blah. And people will throw stats out there, but not tying human behavior or the why those stats exist. Right?
I like stats a ton. I like but I think before you ever design the research or the study or the survey or the analysis that produces those stats, that's the time to figure out the human problem that you're solving. That's the time when you figure out, if I could show that, just what percent of Americans between 25 and 50 who have had jobs at or above the prestige and pay levels of their parents' generation are able to afford houses. Let's look at the data. Now let's produce it. What you've done there is not just produce a stat. you have taken something that many people are feeling, fundamentally feeling, that they believe to be true, and you are putting it on display in a factual way, and now you're making that information available to them in a way that they can essentially use it to throw in the face of all the people who disagreed with them, right? And that's a great stat. I love stats like that, right? When I was at Moz, a ton of the statistics work that I did was Google says X. Let's see if they're lying.
Yeah.
A lot of people hated those stats, and a lot of people loved those stats, but they got a tremendous amount of attention and brought a lot more rigor and process into an industry that historically had been like, well, I've seen this work. Well, I've seen that work. So,
yeah, by the numbers. And you're playing into that confirmation bias and that divisiveness all at the same time.
yep.
Well, we're almost at time here. Rand, is there anything you want to sort of wrap it all up with? Like what's the main theme here for you?
Yeah. Let's see. If you're going to create content, like if you look at this CoSchedule mode, I can see that a bunch of people are in the doc, right? And you probably scrolled down and you've seen that this is thousands of words, and it's a tremendous amount of research. I think someone clearly put their heart and soul into this. And also my suspicion is that you could create something that was 1/10 this amount of effort that is likely to have 10 or 100 times the impact by considering the things that we've talked about today: the emotional resonance, the who's going to amplify this and why, the audience match to the content's positioning, the hook, line, and sinker model. I think if you nail those things, you can do much less work and be much more effective. And this is, I think, the whole goal of what we're trying to do at SparkToro with like chill work, the way that we kind of structure our own work, and what I tried to do with Moz in terms of software tools for SEO to make that process easier and less, intensive. Same thing with SparkToro, trying to make the audience research and understanding way easier and less intensive. You don't have to run $100,000 surveys and do a ton of manual research. Like I think the goal of technology, the goal of innovation and progress generally should be, this thing is hard and frustrating and not accurate. How do I make it better? And that's where entrepreneurship, and creators should be helping folks. So I think you can do that with some of these content frameworks and ideas that we've talked about too.
That's absolutely wonderful. So we are at time. Rand, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been very informative and very enlightening. I really appreciate your time being with us today. Next week, we're going to have Praveen Kumar, who is one of the content leads over at Shopify. He is now somewhere else, and he is absolutely killing it where he's at. If you want to have a piece reviewed by any of our future guests, we're going to have a link in the chat here. Feel free to submit that. Thank you, everybody who attended tonight. Thanks so much, Rand, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the night.